She was cleaning the vacant lot and tripped over a boy hidden in a wheelchair. Caroline's broom caught on something beneath the grimy blanket, and her world tilted forever. What she thought was debris turned out to be a boy, pale, fragile, hidden in a rusted wheelchair like a secret the world had forgotten. Emile. His blue eyes held the same desperation she recognized in her own mirror each morning, the look of someone fighting to survive in a world that had already written them off. At 20, Caroline was already drowning in her father's debts, trading her youth for coins to buy her dying mother's medicine. She had no room in her life for another burden, another mouth to feed, another heart to break. But when Emile whispered, "Please don't tell anyone," something inside her shifted. Maybe it was the way he gripped his wheelchair like it was the only solid thing in his universe. Maybe it was how his voice carried the weight of someone who had learned too young that kindness was rare. Or maybe it was simply that Caroline understood what it meant to be invisible. She promised to return, not knowing that this single act of compassion would soon entangle her in an arrangement that would change 3 lives forever. Because while Caroline was learning to see Emile, Philip Morrison was reviewing her father's unpaid debts, preparing to collect his due in the most unconventional way possible. The morning sun cast long shadows across the vacant lot as Caroline dragged the worn broom through patches of broken glass and scattered debris. Her green eyes, dulled by exhaustion, focused only on the coins Mrs. Henderson had promised, enough for her mother's medicine, maybe a loaf of bread. 20 years old, with chestnut hair cascading to her waist, she moved with the careful precision of someone who couldn't afford to waste energy. The broom caught on something solid beneath a grimy blanket. Caroline tugged harder, expecting another piece of rusted metal or discarded furniture. Instead, the blanket shifted, revealing a pale hand gripping the armrest of a wheelchair. "Oh, God," she whispered, stumbling backward. The boy, he couldn't be more than 16, opened eyes so blue they seemed to hold pieces of the sky. His dark hair was matted, his clothes threadbare, but he was breathing, alive, hidden. "Please don't tell anyone," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the morning wind. Caroline's heart hammered against her ribs. She glanced toward the street, then back at the boy. Emile, she would later learn, a name that would change everything. The smell of wet earth and rusty metal mingled with something else, hope, fragile and unexpected, rising like steam from the morning dew. I won't," she heard herself say, though every instinct screamed to run. Her mother needed her. The medicine couldn't wait. But something in those desperate blue eyes held her captive. "Are you hurt?" she asked, crouching beside the wheelchair. Emile shook his head slowly. "Just hiding." "From who?" "Everyone." The word carried the weight of a lifetime. Caroline looked at the boy, really looked, and saw her own exhaustion reflected back. The same hunger, the same careful way of moving through a world that offered little mercy. But where her eyes held resignation, his held something fiercer, the stubborn determination of someone who refused to disappear. "I have to finish this," she said, gesturing to the half-swept lot. "But I could bring you something. Water? Food?" Emile's grip tightened on his wheelchair. "You'd come back?" The question hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they should cross. Caroline thought of her mother's labored breathing, the empty cupboards at home, the weight of responsibility that pressed down on her shoulders every morning. But she also thought of this boy, alone in a vacant lot, invisible to a world that had already forgotten him. "Yes," she said simply, "I'll come back." The first tear that rolled down Emile's cheek caught the sunlight like a falling star, and Caroline realized that sometimes the most important promises are the ones we never planned to make. That night, She would dream of Philip Morrison's cold mansion on Elm Street, where her father's debts would soon deliver her like an unwilling gift. 3 days passed before Caroline returned to the vacant lot, her arms carrying more than just cleaning supplies. Wrapped in a faded kitchen towel was half a loaf of bread, still soft, and a thermos of weak tea that had cooled during her walk. Emile was exactly where she'd left him, though the blanket was now arranged more carefully around his shoulders. His eyes brightened when he saw her approach, and Caroline felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "I thought you might not come back," he admitted, accepting the bread with trembling fingers. "I said I would." Caroline settled cross-legged on the ground beside his wheelchair, ignoring the dampness seeping through her worn dress. "I always keep my promises." Emile took a small bite, then another, his movements careful and deliberate. "What's your name?" "Caroline." She watched him eat, noting how he made each bite last, how he saved the crust for last. "How long have you been here?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. Emile's voice was stronger today, less like a whisper carried on wind. "I lost count." The afternoon light filtered through the bare branches overhead, casting dancing shadows across their makeshift sanctuary. Caroline pulled weeds as they talked, creating small piles that she would bag later. The mundane task felt different with Emile watching, less like drudgery and more like companionship. "My mother thinks I'm just cleaning," Caroline said, tugging at a stubborn dandelion. "She doesn't know about the money Mrs. Henderson pays me." Money for what?" Caroline's hands stilled. "Medicine, food, things we can't afford since Papa died." The words came easier than expected, perhaps because Emile's situation made her own seem less shameful somehow. "I'm sorry," Emile said, and meant it. They sat in comfortable silence until Caroline noticed the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon. Her mother would worry if she stayed much longer. "I have to go," she said, gathering her tools. "But I'll bring you a proper blanket tomorrow, and maybe some soap." Emile nodded, then hesitated. "Caroline?" "Yes?" "Thank you." 2 simple words that carried the weight of gratitude too large for language. As Caroline walked home, she didn't know that Philip Morrison was at that very moment reviewing her father's unpaid debts with his lawyer, or that her name was already written in elegant script across a marriage contract she had never seen. The scent of honeysuckle from a nearby fence mingled with the evening air, sweet and melancholy, like a lullaby sung in a minor key. But tomorrow she would learn that kindness, once given freely, becomes the foundation upon which all other loves are built. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, thick cream paper that felt expensive between Caroline's fingers. Her mother's face went pale as she read the contents, her hands shaking more than usual. "Caroline, sit down." Her mother's voice carried a weight that made the small kitchen feel even smaller. "What is it, Mama?" "Your father's debts. Mr. Morrison has called them in. All of them." The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples that would reach every corner of their lives. Caroline's green eyes widened. "But Papa's been gone for 2 years. Surely there's a solution." Her mother couldn't meet her gaze. "Mr. Morrison has proposed an arrangement." Indeed, the word hung between them like a blade. Caroline knew, even before her mother explained, that this arrangement would not be of her choosing. "He wants to marry you, Caroline. In exchange, all debts will be forgiven." The world tilted, and Caroline gripped the edge of the wooden table until her knuckles went white. Philip Morrison. She'd seen him at church. A man of 50 with silver hair and eyes like winter frost. Wealthy beyond measure, respected, and completely unknown to her. "I won't," Caroline whispered. "You must." Her mother's voice broke. "We have nowhere else to go." The morning light streaming through their tiny window suddenly felt too bright, too harsh, illuminating every crack in the walls and every thread of desperation woven through their lives. Caroline fled to the vacant lot, her usual supplies forgotten. She found Emile reading a battered book, his finger tracing the words with practiced patience. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he observed, closing the book carefully. "Worse." Caroline collapsed beside his wheelchair, her composure finally cracking. "I'm going to be married." Emile's blue eyes sharpened. "To someone you love. To someone I've never spoken to." The words tasted bitter. "Philip Morrison. He owns half the town, and apparently he owns me too." Emile set his book aside and reached for her hand, his touch gentle but steady. "Tell me." So she did. Every word of her mother's revelation, every detail of the arrangement that would trade her freedom for their survival. Emile listened without judgment, his presence a calm anchor in her storm of emotion. "When?" he asked finally. 3 weeks. Emile was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles across her knuckles. "Maybe he's not what you think." Caroline laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Rich men don't marry poor girls out of kindness, Emile." "No," he agreed. "But sometimes people surprise us." The afternoon wind carried the scent of rain and possibility, though Caroline couldn't yet recognize hope in its whisper. That evening, Philip Morrison stood at his library window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and uncertainty, unaware that the girl he was to marry had spent her day comforting a boy who saw the world more clearly than most. The Morrison estate stood like a monument to wealth and isolation, its iron gates opening to reveal manicured lawns that had never known the touch of weeds. Caroline walked the gravel path in her only good dress, a simple blue cotton that her mother had pressed with trembling hands. Philip Morrison waited on the front steps, tall and imposing in his tailored suit. His silver hair caught the afternoon light, and his grey eyes assessed her with the same clinical precision he might use to evaluate livestock. "Miss Caroline," he said, his voice cultured and distant. "Thank you for coming." "I didn't have much choice," she replied, lifting her chin despite the tremor in her voice. Something flickered across his features, surprise, perhaps, or approval. "Direct. I appreciate honesty." They walked through his mansion in awkward silence, Caroline's worn shoes clicking against marble floors that reflected crystal chandeliers. Everything gleamed with the kind of perfection that money could buy, but warmth couldn't touch. "This will be your home," Philip said, gesturing toward a sitting room that was larger than Caroline's entire house. "I trust you'll find it adequate." "Adequate for what? Being your possession?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Philip stopped walking, turning to face her fully for the first time. His grey eyes held no anger, only a careful consideration that made Caroline feel suddenly exposed. "Is that what you think this is?" "Isn't it?" Caroline met his gaze steadily. "You buy my father's debts, demand marriage as payment, and expect me to be grateful for adequate accommodations." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, filled with unspoken truths and the weight of circumstances neither had chosen. "Your mother is ill," Philip said finally. "The medical bills will be substantial." Caroline's defiance wavered. "How do you—" "I make it my business to know about people in my employ." His voice softened, almost imperceptibly. "The arrangement ensures she receives the best care available. At the cost of my freedom." Philip studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Freedom is often a luxury we can't afford, Miss Caroline. But dignity, that doesn't have to be negotiated away." He moved to a window overlooking the gardens, his shoulders carrying a weight that wealth couldn't lighten. "I propose a marriage of convenience, nothing more. You'll have your own quarters, your own life within these walls." In return, your mother's medical needs will be met and your family's debts forgiven. And what do you get from this arrangement, Mr. Morrison? Philip's reflection in the window glass looked older than his 50 years. Companionship, perhaps, someone who speaks honestly, even when it's inconvenient. Caroline thought of Emile, hidden in his vacant lot, surviving on scraps of kindness and strength that defied his circumstances. Here was another kind of survival, dressed in silk and served on silver platters. I need time to think, she said. Of course, but Caroline... Philip turned from the window, his grey eyes holding something that might have been gentleness. Sometimes the cages we enter willingly are the only ones that come with keys. That evening, as Caroline walked home through streets that would soon no longer be hers, she caught the scent of honeysuckle on the wind and wondered if freedom was something you possessed or something you created. Caroline's wedding day arrived with unseasonable rain, as if the sky itself was weeping for choices unmade and paths untaken. She stood before the mirror in Philip's guest room, now her room, adjusting the simple white dress he had purchased for the occasion. The ceremony was brief, clinical, witnessed only by Philip's lawyer and the courthouse clerk. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Philip's kiss was nothing more than a brush of lips against her cheek, formal and distant as a handshake. "Mrs. Morrison," Philip said as they walked to his carriage, the title sounding foreign on his tongue. "Caroline," she corrected firmly. "I'm still Caroline." He nodded, something almost like approval flickering in his grey eyes. "Caroline, then." The mansion felt different now that it was officially her prison, or her sanctuary, depending on how she chose to see it. Philip showed her to her quarters, a suite of rooms with windows facing the garden, furnished with understated elegance that spoke of money spent with careful taste rather than vulgar display. "I hope you'll be comfortable here," he said, lingering in the doorway, as if unsure of his welcome in what was technically his own home. "And you?" Caroline asked, surprising herself with the question. "Will you be comfortable with this arrangement?" Philip's hands clasped behind his back, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as his default when uncertain. "I haven't been comfortable in a very long time, Caroline. I don't expect marriage to change that." And the rain continued its steady percussion against the windows, each drop a reminder that some things in life were beyond anyone's control, no matter how much money they possessed. That evening, Caroline slipped away to the vacant lot, her heart heavy with the weight of vows she'd never wanted to make. Emile was waiting, a new book in his hands and concern etched across his young features. "How was it?" he asked simply. "Strange, sad, final." Caroline settled beside his wheelchair, grateful for the familiar comfort of his presence. "I keep thinking I should feel different, but I just feel empty." Emile closed his book and studied her face in the fading light. "Maybe that's how all new things begin, empty, waiting to be filled. With what? Whatever you choose to put there." Caroline smiled for the first time all day, genuine warmth breaking through the careful composure she'd maintained since morning. "When did you become so wise?" "When I learned that the world doesn't owe us happiness," Emile said quietly, "but it also doesn't forbid us from finding it." They sat in companionable silence as darkness gathered around them, two young people learning that survival sometimes meant accepting help in forms you never expected to need. "I brought you something," Caroline said, pulling a wrapped package from her bag. Inside was a thick woolen blanket, deep blue and soft as clouds. Emile's eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. "Caroline, you can't afford—" "I can now." The words tasted bitter and sweet simultaneously. "Philip, Mr. Morrison, he's given me an allowance for personal expenses." She didn't tell Emile that she'd already decided to spend most of it ensuring he had what he needed to survive. The scent of wet earth and new beginnings hung in the air like a promise that even the most unlikely seeds could take root in the most barren soil. That night, Philip Morrison found himself wondering why his new wife had returned to his house with dirt under her fingernails and something resembling peace in her green eyes. 3 weeks into their marriage, Caroline discovered Philip in his library at midnight, hunched over ledgers with the weight of sleeplessness carved into his features. A half-empty whiskey glass sat beside papers covered in numbers that seemed to mock rather than comfort. "Can't sleep either?" she asked from the doorway, her white nightgown ghost-like in the lamplight. Philip looked up, startled. "I didn't realize you were awake." "The rain," Caroline said, though it was really thoughts of Emile that kept her restless. She'd begun visiting him daily, bringing food and warmth, watching him grow stronger under her care. "Would you like some tea? I could make some." "You don't need to serve me, Caroline." "I'm not serving you, I'm offering." She moved into the room, noting how he unconsciously straightened when she approached. "What keeps you up at night, Philip?" He gestured at the ledgers. "Numbers, always numbers. The mill workers need raises I can barely afford. The town needs repairs that will bankrupt me, and everyone assumes wealth means endless resources." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to find. Caroline studied his face, seeing exhaustion where she'd once seen coldness. "Why did you really marry me?" Philip's hand stilled on the papers. "Loneliness, perhaps. This house, it echoes. And now it echoes less." The honesty surprised them both. Caroline found herself moving closer, drawn by something vulnerable in his grey eyes. "Philip, what if we tried to be friends?" "Friends? Not husband and wife in the traditional sense, but companions, partners in this strange arrangement we've made." Philip considered this, his fingers tracing the rim of his whiskey glass. "I'm not sure I remember how to be anyone's friend." "Neither am I," Caroline admitted, "but we could learn together." Outside, lightning illuminated the garden in stark black and white, beauty stripped to its essential elements. "There's something I need to tell you," Caroline said suddenly. "I've been helping someone, a boy named Emile. He's alone." Philip's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. "Where?" "The vacant lot on Maple Street. He lives there in a wheelchair. He has nowhere else to go. Bring him here." Caroline blinked. "What?" "Tomorrow. Bring him here." Philip closed the ledger with finality. "This house has empty rooms, and you have a generous heart. Perhaps that's what we both need." The words hit Caroline like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, unexpected, warming, transformative in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. Emile's eyes widened as Caroline approached the vacant lot with Philip beside her, the older man's expensive shoes crunching softly on broken glass and scattered debris. "This is Philip," Caroline said gently, crouching beside Emile's wheelchair. "My husband." Philip stepped forward, his usual commanding presence softened by something Caroline had never seen before, genuine compassion. "Emile, I presume?" The boy nodded, his grip tightening on his wheelchair's armrests. "Sir." "Caroline tells me you're quite well read." Philip gestured to the battered books scattered around Emile's makeshift shelter. "What are you reading currently?" "Treasure Island," Emile replied, surprise flickering across his features, "though some of the pages are missing." "Ah, Stevenson, a fine choice." Philip knelt, ignoring the dampness seeping through his expensive trousers. "Would you like to see my library? I believe I have a complete copy." The morning air carried the scent of possibility, fragile as spider silk, but stronger than either man dared hope. Emile looked between Caroline and Philip, understanding passing wordlessly between them. "You want me to come with you?" "If you're willing," Philip said simply. Caroline seems to think you might benefit from a warm bed and regular meals. And I could use someone who appreciates good literature." Caroline's heart swelled as she watched her husband, this man she'd married for duty, offer kindness to a boy who had nothing to give in return. "What about the wheelchair?" Emil asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What about it?" Philip stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "My house has ramps. I had them installed years ago for my late mother." Caroline stared at Philip, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Not the cold businessman who'd bought her father's debts, but a man shaped by his own losses, his own loneliness. "Yes," Emil said, his voice stronger now. "Yes, I'd like that very much." As they helped Emil gather his few possessions, Caroline felt something shift between her and Philip. Not love, not yet, but something warmer than duty, deeper than arrangement. "Thank you," she whispered, as Philip carefully folded Emil's blanket. Philip's grey eyes met hers, and for the first time since their wedding, she saw the man beneath the money. "Thank you for showing me what I'd been missing." That afternoon, as Emil explored his new room with wonder touching every corner of his young face, Caroline realized that sometimes the most profound transformations begin not with grand gestures, but with simple acts of seeing, truly seeing the people around us. But neither Caroline nor Philip noticed the dark figure watching from across the street, or saw the way Mrs. Henderson's face twisted with something that looked disturbingly like rage. Mrs. Henderson's poison spread through the town like wildfire, her whispered accusations painting Caroline as a manipulative gold digger who had somehow bewitched the respectable Philip Morrison. The rumors reached Philip's business associates, his church congregation, even the servants who had once treated Caroline with cautious respect. "They're saying I planned it all," Caroline told Philip as they stood in his library, Emil reading quietly in the corner, "that I used Emil to gain your sympathy, manipulated you into marriage for your money." Philip's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists. "Let them talk. Their opinions mean nothing. But your reputation, my reputation, was built on loneliness and fear," Philip interrupted, his voice fierce with conviction. "I'd rather be gossiped about for choosing love than respected for choosing isolation." Emil looked up from his book, his blue eyes bright with understanding beyond his years. "Caroline, you taught me that some people will always find fault with kindness, but that doesn't make kindness wrong." The afternoon light streaming through the library windows seemed to glow with the warmth of truth finally spoken aloud. Caroline felt tears prick her eyes as she looked at these two men, one her husband, one her heart's chosen brother, who had become her family not through blood or obligation, but through the simple act of seeing each other clearly. Philip moved closer, his hand reaching tentatively for hers. "Caroline, these past months, you've transformed this house from a mausoleum into a home. You've given me friendship when I deserved only duty. And you've shown me that wealth means nothing if you have no one to share it with." "Philip, I love you," he said simply, the words falling between them like seeds finally finding fertile ground. Not the arrangement, not the convenience. You, your fierce heart, your stubborn kindness, your ability to see hope where others see only hardship. Caroline's breath caught as she looked into his grey eyes and saw not the cold businessman who had purchased her father's debts, but the man who had knelt in broken glass to offer comfort to a forgotten boy. "I love you too," she whispered, and meant it completely. Emil clapped softly from his corner, grinning. "About time you both figured that out." Philip laughed, the first truly joyful sound Caroline had ever heard from him, and pulled her into his arms. When he kissed her, it tasted of new beginnings and quiet courage. Outside, the town could whisper all it wanted. Inside, three people who had found each other in the most unexpected ways were writing their own story, one where love wasn't something you fell into, but something you built, brick by careful brick, day by precious day. I'm not yours, but I can still be mine, Caroline had once thought. Now she understood. The greatest freedom came not from belonging to no one, but from choosing exactly who deserved the gift of your heart. The wedding bells that had once sounded like a funeral dirge now rang with the music of genuine joy. Philip's grey eyes, which Caroline had once thought cold as winter frost, now held the warmth of a man who had remembered how to hope. I never thought I could love someone I was forced to marry, Caroline whispered as they stood in the garden where Emile was teaching the cook's children how to identify wildflowers. And I never thought I could love someone who saw through my money to the man underneath, Philip replied, his arms encircling her with the tender strength of someone who finally understood the difference between possession and partnership. Emile looked up from his botany lesson, his face bright with the contentment of belonging somewhere safe. "You two are disgustingly happy," he called out, grinning. The afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and promise, while the scent of honeysuckle carried whispers of all the tomorrows they would build together. Caroline had learned that love wasn't always the lightning strike of passion poets wrote about. Sometimes it was quieter, the steady choice to see goodness in unexpected places, to offer kindness when the world demanded hardness, to build something beautiful from the broken pieces life handed you. Have you ever found love in the most impossible circumstances? Have you discovered that sometimes the heart we're meant to cherish isn't the one we planned to find? Subscribe, activate notifications, and share this story if it touched your heart.